to bring it back to some of your research, like thinking of these first things made in space as those early tools that we find in historical context here on Earth, like
Mm,
making sure that those things are taken care of so that they can be seen and observed later down the line, and we understand
hmm.
where we start from.
Yeah. So I guess also to for some background for your listeners, my research specifically is focusing on the first 3D printed objects from space. I've kind of focused really specifically on the ratchet wrench, which I believe you're familiar with,
Yes.
and how these objects have kind of been replicated and seen throughout culture and society, I guess, and kind of and really like what are they? Like that's the thing that's already complicated with 3D objects in general. Is like
Mm.
where is the object? Is it the one that's you're printing yourself? Is it the file?
Hmm.
And then how does that change when the first one in the public view was printed in space? Because that gives it sort of like a special aura, like we were referring
Yeah.
to earlier.
Yeah. Like an ethos, like, like
Yeah.
this is where this thing came from. So let's recap your your research, if you don't mind.
Mhm.
So you've gone through this whole process. You've taken a look at, you've spoken to a whole bunch of different people in this space, myself included. Is
Yeah.
there anything that you have taken away from it?
I think, which we've not talked about, but I think the one of the main things that I've taken away is how important the story was. So
Mm,
coming to this late, sorry, but essentially as the story goes, the astronaut Barry Wilmore, or Butch he's called, in after the first phase of printing, when they basically did a bunch of coupons that were just to test how the printer works. You might know
mm,
better than me, Alex, on that
yep.
part. Um, but after that he needed a wrench, didn't have the right one for the right job. Kind of it gets muddy around why he needed it, but that's
Yeah.
fine. And then the people at Made in Space who were doing the 3D printing, they drew one up, I don't know, designed one, engineered one, whatever
Yeah.
word you want to use,
Designed. Yeah.
in like a couple of days, sent it up by email. And that was different from the other ones because they were all on the hardware that had gone up with the printer, whereas this
Mm,
was the first emailed tool. So I think that added to the sort of like sexiness of the
right.
headlines, like we've emailed a tool to space. um and I think this kind of like astronaut in need really took the public imagination and really allowed people to run with it and like compare it to the Star Trek replicator and
Right.
other sci-fi options. I think it really kind of made this, it combined a real problem with a sort of science fiction scenario, even though
Mm,
it is all real, it's not science
yeah.
fiction. But I think that's really something that was really important within this ratchet, is that it kind of holds that in it. And I think the secondary part of that is it also holds the narrative of moving off Earth, right? Like if we can 3D print tools, if
Mm,
we can 3D print anything, it means we can get further and further from Earth because we don't have to bring things with us.
right.
So it also acts as like a starting point
Mhm.
of moving away from Earth, moving to Mars, that kind of stuff.
I
That's where I've been writing this
That's
chapter at the moment, so I'm obsessed with it right now. But yeah,
no, this is great because I don't get to talk to anybody about this. So,
yeah,
so like in 3D printing, I've worked as an application engineer, just to give people some context. So like an
yeah.
application engineer, yes, works with like software and stuff like that, but is more is highly focused on the part that's being made and how it's going to perform. So like it's kind of all about the part at the end of the day. And even when someone buys a 3D printer, you're the biggest mistake most people make when they buy a 3D printer is I want a 3D printer. And if you don't have a reason for it, hobbyist 3D printer, if it's cheap, that's a different thing. But for a company and a business or an organization like NASA to put a 3D printer in space, there has to be that reason to do that. And that's what
Hmm.
a lot of the industry is focused on Earth with 3D printing is how do we tell this story to these people so that they buy this and it becomes real? They obviously can save money and get return on their investment, but at the same time, it's about innovating and changing things up. So, with the pandemic, we saw that huge switch to 3D printing to help alleviate the supply chain issues that we had.
Mm-hmm.
The early days, I was helping 3D print masks for people, or ear restraints, so that the strings weren't pulling on you all the time.
Mm-hmm.
And it was amazing how quickly people could get together on that. And it like got a whole bunch of people in their basements really jazzed up about like doing something to help. And it changed the whole way people look at it. I think um, President Biden the other day had this speech. I don't know any of the specifics yet, but focusing on investing in additive technology for supply
Mm.
chain issues in the future. And I think that's a great thing to start focusing on that. And it helps people around the world. You can send a file around the world in a second, and anyone with a printer on site can build it. It's a really magical thing that we're only just figuring out here, and it's gonna it's gonna change the way we do stuff in space.
Yeah, I mean, that's such a good point, Alex. I feel like that could be an entire dissertation in itself, is looking at, I'm like, excuse me, I need to change my reading.
Well,
So,
notes.
but I feel like that's, it's so true, because having done a lot of literature in what, like, the history of 3D printing, especially in like the public opinion, and how it's going to be like this third industrial revolution and it was going to change everything, and then it kind of slowed down, like we stopped talking about it for a minute.
Yeah.
But I think that the pandemic definitely provided an opportunity to showcase how this like sort of decentralized method of production that's like in the hands of people in their households, like that anyone can really control it, and it can be very what's the word, when you can like modify it to whoever or whatever, right? Like,
Yeah.
if
Yeah.
it
Fully
doesn't take any more
customizable.
time to make
Yeah.
something in blue versus yellow. I mean, changing
Right.
the filament, I know, but
Yeah. But that's still, yeah.
but compared to like doing something in, like, you can, or sizing different, right? Like
Right.
obviously you can change the color for any kind of manufacturing, but whatever. I feel like it's made it, people understand and appreciate actually what 3D printing does, even though
Mm,
that has been recognized by scholars for ages, and
right.
like, Wired magazine, whatever. But I feel like
Hmm.
it's taken a long time for the public and like, government to catch on.
Yeah. No, true. And it's funny because the people that can make a 3D printer aren't necessarily the people, like, those people are not going to have all the ideas.
Mm-hmm.
Like, and a lot of what we do on our Instagram page, because I just wanted to prove out this thesis for myself, was if I show people what I'm printing and what is possible, even if it's something stupid simple, but if you just show people that it can be made, it gets other people thinking about other things. And I can't tell you how many people have reached out just on DMs and just be like, "Hey, I saw you print this. What do you think about this?" And it's something I never would have even thought about.
Mm-hmm.
And everyone has that capability. It's just, it, I think that one day we will get 3D printers to the point where everyone's going to have them in their home, and just like you have a desktop computer or a cell phone, like, and at that point you have all of the material. At that point, you cut out the middleman of the manufacturing, and to put the
Mm-hmm.
means of production in the hands of the individual is something that's never happened really
Yeah.
in history, and it has that potential to change things. um but
And I think also what maybe the average person who doesn't interact with 3D printing much might not think about, and this is, I can't take credit for this, this has come from one of the participants in my research, but
mm,
that you can think of how to engineer things so much differently, because first of all, if you're making things all in one piece, that's different, right? You don't
right.
need like nuts and bolts, but
Mm,
also you can embed things while
yes,
you're printing. Like you can almost design, I think the person who was talking to me said you can design from the inside out, so you don't have to design
that's
just
beautiful.
reproducing something but in 3D printed plastic or metal. You can think completely differently, because there's a whole different rules and mechanics at work.
It's, oh man, like, I anyone that's interested in getting into 3D printing, like, even if you think it's somewhat fascinating, like, there's so much beauty in, from a design standpoint. I think one of the things, and why I talk about SpaceX so much in this podcast, because of just the way that they do engineering. They don't
Mm-hmm.
look at it as, you know, I've had definitely some weird back and forth and angst from old space and like NASA in the old days and stuff like that. Um, Partly from my struggle of getting into the industry, but the the approach of looking at it, what is the best thing? Like Starship is a great example, right? Like SpaceX's next big rocket, it's the colony. Like it's the thing where people live. You can fly there and you can fly back. That's not possible right now.
Mm,
And that type of big picture goal, big risk. That's what the Saturn V was. That's what the moon missions were. It's taking that approach, and 3D printing opens up the engineer to really make things. And anyone like makers are the maker community is something that I'm so happy that I found, because it's just you don't have to be like a degreed engineer. I think there's a lot of
mhm,
stigma that comes with someone having a degree, and believe me, I understand that. But there's so many people that can make things. Can like we have a resin 3D printer now that we're able to make basically the positive part of a casting. So we could make jewelry potentially by
mm,
printing this plastic, burning it and getting it out, and then filling it with metal. Like I can do that in my backyard. Like that's a wild thing and a
mhm.
capability to allow an individual to do. So there's so much potential, and I could talk about it forever.
I know, but I think it's unfortunate that 3D printing kind of, I mean, from my perspective, I could be wrong,
Please.
but kind of has this like, it almost seems like gimmicky for people who don't really
Mm,
understand it. So like, oh, create like a 3D printed twist tie, amazing. Like,
yeah.
I think there's a part of it that is so cool, and like I don't know if misunderstood, because maybe that's just the corner of the internet I exist in. But
No, it's
yeah,
pervasive in the industry too. I mean, like even plastic printers to a certain, a lot of the things that people print are gimmicks,
mm,
because they're trying to sell stuff, right? Like you can
yeah,
give away a gimmick really easily, and I think that's part of it. Part of it is also, like you mentioned before, it moved so quickly. The industry and the expectations, the space industry did the same thing, where we thought we would be on the moon and Mars and traveling through
mm-hmm,
space and have flying cars, and that didn't happen.
mm-hmm,
And we're in that period right now with 3D printing, where we're only just starting to understand what really can be made and
yeah,
changed, and that the work a lot of people have been doing to catch up the technology is finally starting to hit the ground. So
yeah. I think it's so interesting though that 3D printing and space exploration or aerospace sciences have kind of had this similar trajectory that's been set in place because of science fiction. Like
mm,
we expected we were going to be in space because of all different kinds of science fiction, including like the Jetsons, if you call that science
true,
fiction. I don't know.
true.
But even like with 3D printing has been in many different forms, like in terms of additive manufacturing or rapid prototyping
Yeah,
within science fiction, that you just assume like, okay, why can't I have my food on demand?
right.
Whereas right now we're like 3D printing like goo. That's kind of
Yeah.
as far as we can get for food. But yeah, I think the expectations were just made so high because of these
Hmm.
like visions of the future.
Yeah. And I wonder if that's just like a technology thing, because I don't know if that's the
Mm,
case with everything else, because maybe everything else had like a utility immediately, where this is
mm-hmm,
kind of open ended. It's almost magic in a certain sense. Um,
mm-hmm.
yeah, it's kind of crazy.
Yeah, I guess if there was like really janky teleporters, we'd be like,
Mm.
okay,
Yeah,
I
I
guess.
think I'm
Yeah.
good. Yeah.
Yeah.
I don't want my arm like coming out of my head or something
Yeah,
like
yeah.
that.
Ideally not. Yeah.
No.